V.I. Lenin. Letters from Afar. First letter. The first stage of the First Revolution, see footnote 1. The First Revolution engendered by the imperialist world war has broken out. The first revolution, but certainly not the last. Judging by the scanty information available in Switzerland, the first stage of this first revolution, namely, of the Russian Revolution of March 1, 1917, has ended. This first stage of our revolution will certainly not be the last. How could such a miracle have happened, that in only 8 days, the period indicated by Mr. Milyakov in his boastful telegram to all Russia's representatives abroad, a monarchy collapsed that had maintained itself for centuries, and that in spite of everything had managed to maintain itself throughout the 3 years of the tremendous, nationwide class battles of 1905–07. There are no miracles in nature or history, but every abrupt turn in history, and this applies to every revolution, presents such a wealth of content, unfolds such unexpected and specific combinations of forms of struggle and alignment of forces of the contestants, that to the lay mind there is much that must appear miraculous. The combination of a number of factors of world historic importance was required for the Tsarist monarchy to have collapsed in a few days. We shall mention the chief of them. Without the tremendous class battles and the revolutionary energy displayed by the Russian proletariat during the 3 years 1905–07, the Second Revolution could not possibly have been so rapid in the sense that its initial stage was completed in a few days. The First Revolution, 1905, deeply plowed the soil, uprooted age-old prejudices, awakened millions of workers and tens of millions of peasants to political life and political struggle, and revealed to each other, and to the world, all classes, and all the principal parties, of Russian society in their true character and in the true alignment of their interests, their forces, their modes of action, and their immediate and ultimate aims. This first revolution, and the succeeding period of counter-revolution, 1907–14, laid bare the very essence of the Tsarist monarchy, brought it to the utmost limit, exposed all the rottenness and infamy, the cynicism and corruption of the Tsar's clique, dominated by that monster, Rasputin. It exposed all the bestiality of the Romanov family, those pogrom-mongers who drenched Russia in the blood of Jews, workers and revolutionaries, those landlords, first among peers, who own millions of decennies of land and are prepared to stoop to any brutality, to any crime, to ruin and strangle any number of citizens in order to preserve the sacred right of property for themselves and their class. Without the revolution of 1905–07 and the counter-revolution of 1907–14, there could not have been that clear self-determination of all classes of the Russian people and of the nations inhabiting Russia, that determination of the relation of these classes to each other and to the Tsarist monarchy, which manifested itself during the 8 days of the February to March Revolution of 1917. This 8-day revolution was performed, if we may use a metaphorical expression, as though after a dozen major and minor rehearsals, the actors knew each other, their parts, their places and their setting in every detail, through and through, down to every more or less important shade of political trend and mode of action. For the first great revolution of 1905, which the Guchkovs and Milyakovs and their hangers-on denounced as a great rebellion, led after the lapse of 12 years, to the brilliant, the glorious revolution of 1917, the Guchkovs and Milyakovs have proclaimed it glorious because it has put them in power, for the time being. But this required a great, mighty and all-powerful stage manager, capable, on the one hand, of vastly accelerating the course of world history, and, on the other, of engendering worldwide crises of unparalleled intensity, economic, political, national and international. Apart from an extraordinary acceleration of world history, it was also necessary that history make particularly abrupt turns, in order that at one such turn the filthy and blood-stained cart of the Romanov monarchy should be overturned at one stroke. This all-powerful stage manager, this mighty accelerator was the imperialist world war. That it is a world war is now indisputable, for the United States and China are already half involved today, and will be fully involved tomorrow. That it is an imperialist war on both sides is now likewise indisputable. Only the capitalists and their hangers-on, the social patriots and social chauvinists, or, if instead of general critical definitions we use political names familiar in Russia, only the Guchkovs and Lvovs, Milyakovs and Shingaryovs on the one hand, and only the Gvozdeyovs, Patrusovs, Chkenkolis, Kerenskys and Chkaidzes on the other, can deny or gloss over this fact. Both the German and the Anglo-French bourgeoisie are waging the war for the plunder of foreign countries and the strangling of small nations, for financial world supremacy and the division and redivision of colonies, and in order to save the tottering capitalist regime by misleading and dividing the workers of the various countries. The imperialist war was bound, with objective inevitability, immensely to accelerate and intensify to an unprecedented degree the class struggle of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie. It was bound to turn into a civil war between the hostile classes. This transformation has been started by the February to March Revolution of 1917, the first stage of which has been marked, firstly, by a joint blow at Tsarism struck by two forces: 1. The whole of bourgeois and landlord Russia, with all her unconscious hangers-on and all her conscious leaders, the British and French ambassadors and capitalists; and the other, the Soviet of Workers' Deputies, which has begun to win over the soldiers and peasants' deputies. See footnote 2. These three political camps, these three fundamental political forces: 1. The Tsarist monarchy, the head of the feudal landlords, of the old bureaucracy and the military caste; 2. Bourgeois and landlord Octoberist cadet Russia, behind which trailed the petty bourgeoisie, of which Kerensky and Chkaids are the principal representatives; 3. The Soviet of Workers' Deputies, which is seeking to make the entire proletariat and the entire mass of the poorest part of the population its allies. These three fundamental political forces fully and clearly revealed themselves even in the 8 days of the first stage, and even to an observer so remote from the scene of events as the present writer, who is obliged to content himself with the meager foreign press dispatches. But before dealing with this in greater detail, I must return to the part of my letter devoted to a factor of prime importance, namely, the imperialist world war. The war shackled the belligerent powers, the belligerent groups of capitalists, the bosses of the capitalist system, the slave owners of the capitalist slave system, to each other with chains of iron. One bloody clot, such is the social and political life of the present moment in history. The socialists who deserted to the bourgeoisie on the outbreak of the war, all these Davids and Seidmans in Germany and the Plekhanovs, Patrusovs, Gvozdeyovs and company in Russia, clamored loud and long against the illusions of the revolutionaries, against the illusions of the Ball Manifesto, against the farcical dream of turning the imperialist war into a civil war. They sang praises in every key to the strength, tenacity and adaptability allegedly revealed by capitalism. They, who had aided the capitalists to adapt, tame, mislead and divide the working classes of the various countries. But he who laughs last laughs best. The bourgeoisie has been unable to delay for long the revolutionary crisis engendered by the war. That crisis is growing with irresistible force in all countries, beginning with Germany, which, according to an observer who recently visited that country, is suffering brilliantly organized famine, and ending with England and France, where famine is also looming, but where organization is far less brilliant. It was natural that the revolutionary crisis should have broken out first of all in Tsarist Russia, where the disorganization was most appalling and the proletariat most revolutionary, not by virtue of any special qualities, but because of the living traditions of 1905. This crisis was precipitated by the series of extremely severe defeats sustained by Russia and her allies. They shook up the old machinery of government and the old order and roused the anger of all classes of the population against them. They embittered the army, wiped out a very large part of the old commanding personnel, composed of die-hard aristocrats and exceptionally corrupt bureaucratic elements, and replaced it by a young, fresh, mainly bourgeois, commoner, petty bourgeois personnel. Those who, groveling to the bourgeoisie or simply lacking backbone, howled and wailed about defeatism, are now faced by the fact of the historical connection between the defeat of the most backward and barbarous Tsarist monarchy and the beginning of the revolutionary conflagration. But while the defeats early in the war were a negative factor that precipitated the upheaval, the connection between Anglo-French finance capital, Anglo-French imperialism, and Russian Octoberist cadet capital was a factor that hastened this crisis by the direct organization of a plot against Nicholas Romanov. This highly important aspect of the situation is, for obvious reasons, hushed up by the Anglo-French press and maliciously emphasized by the German. We Marxists must soberly face the truth and not allow ourselves to be confused either by the lies, the official sugary diplomatic and ministerial lies, of the first group of imperialist belligerents, or by the sniggering and smirking of their financial and military rivals of the other belligerent group. The whole course of events in the February to March Revolution clearly shows that the British and French embassies, with their agents and connections, who had long been making the most desperate efforts to prevent separate agreements and a separate peace between Nicholas II, and last, we hope, and we will endeavor to make him that, and Wilhelm II, directly organized a plot in conjunction with the Octoberists and cadets, in conjunction with a section of the generals and army and St. Petersburg garrison officers, with the express object of deposing Nicholas Romanov. Let us not harbor any illusions. Let us not make the mistake of those who, like certain OC supporters or Mensheviks who are oscillating between Gvozdioff-Patrusov policy and internationalism and only too often slip into petty bourgeois pacifism, are now ready to extol agreement between the Workers' Party and the Cadets, support of the latter by the former, etc. in conformity with the old, and by no means Marxist, doctrine that they have learned by rote. They are trying to veil the plot of the Anglo-French imperialists and the Guchkovs and Miliakovs aimed at deposing the chief warrior, Nicholas Romanov, and putting more energetic, fresh and more capable warriors in his place. That the revolution succeeded so quickly and, seemingly, at the first superficial glance, so radically, is only due to the fact that, as a result of an extremely unique historical situation, absolutely dissimilar currents, absolutely heterogeneous class interests, absolutely contrary political and social strivings have merged, and in a strikingly harmonious manner. Namely, the conspiracy of the Anglo-French imperialists, who impelled Miliakov, Guchkov and company to seize power for the purpose of continuing the imperialist war, for the purpose of conducting the war still more ferociously and obstinately, for the purpose of slaughtering fresh millions of Russian workers and peasants in order that the Guchkovs might obtain Constantinople, the French capitalists Syria, the British capitalists Mesopotamia, and so on. This on the one hand. On the other, there was a profound proletarian and mass popular movement of a revolutionary character, a movement of the entire poorest section of the population of town and country, for bread, for peace, for real freedom. It would simply be foolish to speak of the revolutionary proletariat of Russia supporting the cadet Octoberist imperialism, which has been patched up with English money and is as abominable as Tsarist imperialism. The revolutionary workers were destroying, have already destroyed to a considerable degree and will destroy to its foundations the infamous Tsarist monarchy. They are neither elated nor dismayed by the fact that at certain brief and exceptional historical conjunctures they were aided by the struggle of Buchanan, Guchkov, Miliakov and company to replace one monarch by another monarch, also preferably a Romanov. Such, and only such, is the way the situation developed. Such, and only such, is the view that can be taken by a politician who does not fear the truth, who soberly weighs the balance of social forces in the revolution, who appraises every current situation not only from the standpoint of all its current peculiarities, but also from the standpoint of the more fundamental motivations, the deeper interest relationship of the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, both in Russia and throughout the world. The workers of Petrograd, like the workers of the whole of Russia, self-sacrificingly fought the Tsarist monarchy, fought for freedom, land for the peasants, and for peace, against the imperialist slaughter. To continue and intensify that slaughter, Anglo-French imperialist capital hatched court intrigues, conspired with the officers of the guards, incited and encouraged the Guchkovs and Miliakovs, and fixed up a complete new government, which in fact did seize power immediately the proletarian struggle had struck the first blows at Tsarism. This new government, in which Lvov and Gudchkov of the Octobrists and Peaceful Renovation Party, see footnote 3, yesterday's abettors of Stolypin the hangman, control really important posts, vital posts, decisive posts, the army and the bureaucracy. This government, in which Milyakov and the other cadets, see footnote 4, are more than anything decorations, a signboard. They are there to deliver sentimental professorial speeches, and in which the Trudovik, see footnote 5, Kerensky is a balalaika on which they play to deceive the workers and peasants. This government is not a fortuitous assemblage of persons. They are representatives of the new class that has risen to political power in Russia, the class of capitalist landlords and bourgeoisie which has long been ruling our country economically, and which during the revolution of 1905–07, the counter-revolutionary period of 1907–14, and finally, and with especial rapidity, the war period of 1914–17, was quick to organize itself politically, taking over control of the local government bodies, public education, congresses of various types, the Duma, the war industries committees, etc. This new class was already almost completely in power by 1917, and therefore it needed only the first blows to bring Tsarism to the ground and clear the way for the bourgeoisie. The imperialist war, which required an incredible exertion of effort, so accelerated the course of backward Russia's development that we have at one blow, seemingly at one blow, caught up with Italy, England, and almost with France. We have obtained a coalition, a national, i.e., adapted for carrying on the imperialist slaughter and for fooling the people, parliamentary government. Side by side with this government, which as regards the present war is but the agent of the billion-dollar firm England and France, there has arisen the chief, unofficial, as yet undeveloped and comparatively weak workers' government, which expresses the interests of the proletariat and of the entire poor section of the urban and rural population. This is the Soviet of Workers' Deputies in Petrograd, which is seeking connections with the soldiers and peasants, and also with the agricultural workers, with the latter particularly and primarily, of course, more than with the peasants. Such is the actual political situation, which we must first endeavor to define with the greatest possible objective precision, in order that Marxist tactics may be based upon the only possible solid foundation, the foundation of facts. The Tsarist monarchy has been smashed, but not finally destroyed. The Octobrist cadet bourgeois government, which wants to fight the imperialist war to a finish, and which in reality is the agent of the financial firm England and France, is obliged to promise the people the maximum of liberties and sops compatible with the maintenance of its power over the people and the possibility of continuing the imperialist slaughter. The Soviet of Workers' Deputies is an organization of the workers, the embryo of a workers' government, the representative of the interests of the entire mass of the poor section of the population, i.e., of 9/10 of the population, which is striving for peace, bread and freedom. The conflict of these three forces determines the situation that has now arisen, a situation that is transitional from the first stage of the revolution to the second. The antagonism between the first and second force is not profound, it is temporary, the result solely of the present conjuncture of circumstances, of the abrupt turn of events in the imperialist war. The whole of the new government is monarchist, for Kerensky's verbal republicanism simply cannot be taken seriously, is not worthy of a statesman and, objectively, is political chicanery. The new government, which has not dealt the Tsarist monarchy the final blow, has already begun to strike a bargain with the landlord Romanov dynasty. The bourgeoisie of the Octobrist cadet type needs a monarchy to serve as the head of the bureaucracy and the army in order to protect the privileges of capital against the working people. He who says that the workers must support the new government in the interests of the struggle against Tsarist reaction, and apparently this is being said by the Patrusovs, Gvozdyovs, Chkenklas and also, all evasiveness notwithstanding, by Tkides, is a traitor to the workers, a traitor to the cause of the proletariat, to the cause of peace and freedom. For actually, Precisely this new government is already bound hand and foot by imperialist capital, by the imperialist policy of war and plunder, has already begun to strike bargain, without consulting the people, with the dynasty, is already working to restore the Tsarist monarchy, is already soliciting the candidature of Mikhail Romanov as the new kinglet, is already taking measures to prop up the throne, to substitute for the legitimate, lawful, ruling by virtue of the old law, monarchy a Bonapartist, plebiscite monarchy, ruling by virtue of a fraudulent plebiscite. No, if there is to lie a real struggle against the Tsarist monarchy, if freedom is to be guaranteed in fact and not merely in words, in the glib promises of Miliukov and Kerensky, the workers must not support the new government, the government must support the workers. For the only guarantee of freedom and of the complete destruction of Tsarism lies in arming the proletariat, in strengthening, extending and developing the role, significance and power of the Soviet of Workers' Deputies. All the rest is mere phrase-mongering and lies, self-deception on the part of the politicians of the liberal and radical camp, fraudulent trickery. Help, or at least do not hinder, the arming of the workers, and freedom in Russia will be invincible, the monarchy irretrievable, the republic secure. Otherwise the Gutchkovs and Miliukovs will restore the monarchy and grant none, absolutely none of the liberties they promised. All bourgeois politicians and all bourgeois revolutions fed the people and fooled the workers with promises. Ours is a bourgeois revolution, therefore, the workers must support the bourgeoisie, say the Potrasovs, Gvozdyovs and Chkaidzes, as Plekhanov said yesterday. Ours is a bourgeois revolution, we Marxists say, therefore the workers must open the eyes of the people to the deception practiced by the bourgeois politicians, teach them to put no faith in words, to depend entirely on their own strength, their own organization, their own unity, and their own weapons. The government of the Octobrists and Cadets, of the Gutchkovs and Miliukovs, cannot, even if it sincerely wanted to, only infants can think that Gutchkov and Lvov are sincere, cannot give the people either peace, bread, or freedom. It cannot give peace because it is a war government, a government for the continuation of the imperialist slaughter, a government of plunder, out to plunder Armenia, Galicia and Turkey, annex Constantinople, reconquer Poland, Courland, Lithuania, etc. It is a government bound hand and foot by Anglo-French imperialist capital. Russian capital is merely a branch of the worldwide firm which manipulates hundreds of billions of rubles and is called England and France. It cannot give bread because it is a bourgeois government. At best, it can give the people brilliantly organized famine, as Germany has done. But the people will not accept famine. They will learn, and probably very soon, that there is bread and that it can be obtained, but only by methods that do not respect the sanctity of capital and land ownership. It cannot give freedom because it is a landlord and capitalist government which fears the people and has already begun to strike a bargain with the Romanov dynasty. The tactical problems of our immediate attitude towards this government will be dealt with in another article. In it, we shall explain the peculiarity of the present situation, which is a transition from the first stage of the revolution to the second, and why the slogan, the task of the day, at this moment must he, workers, you have performed miracles of proletarian heroism, the heroism of the people, in the civil war against Tsarism. You must perform miracles of organization of the proletariat and of the whole people, to prepare the way for your victory in the second stage of the revolution. Confining ourselves for the present to an analysis of the class struggle and the alignment of class forces at this stage of the revolution, we have still to put the question, who are the proletariat's allies in this revolution? It has two allies. First, the broad mass of the semi-proletarian and partly also of the small peasant population, who number scores of millions and constitute the overwhelming majority of the population of Russia. For this mass peace, bread, freedom and land are essential. It is inevitable that to a certain extent this mass will be under the influence of the bourgeoisie, particularly of the petty bourgeoisie, to which it is most akin in its conditions of life, vacillating between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. The cruel lessons of war, and they will be the more cruel the more vigorously the war is prosecuted by Guchkov, Lvov, Milyakov and co., will inevitably push this mass towards the proletariat, compel it to follow the proletariat. We must now take advantage of the relative freedom of the new order and of the Soviets of Workers' Deputies to enlighten and organize this mass first of all and above all. Soviets of Peasants' Deputies and Soviets of Agricultural Workers, that is one of our most urgent tasks. In this connection we shall strive not only for the agricultural workers to establish their own separate Soviets, but also for the propertyless and poorest peasants to organize separately from the well-to-do peasants. The special tasks and special forms of organization urgently needed at the present time will be dealt with in the next letter. Second, the ally of the Russian proletariat is the proletariat of all the belligerent countries and of all countries in general. At present this ally is to a large degree repressed by the war, and all too often the European social chauvinists speak in its name, men who, like Plekhanov, Gvozdov and Patrusov in Russia, have deserted to the bourgeoisie. But the liberation of the proletariat from their influence has progressed with every month of the imperialist war, and the Russian Revolution will inevitably immensely hasten this process. With these two allies, the proletariat, utilizing the peculiarities of the present transition situation, can and will proceed, first, to the achievement of a democratic republic and complete victory of the peasantry over the landlords, instead of the Guchkov-Milyakov semi-monarchy, and then to socialism, which alone can give the war-weary people peace, bread and freedom. On Lenin. Written on March 7, 1917, published according to a typewritten copy verified with the Pravda text. Published in Pravda Nos. 14 and 15, March 21 and 22, 1917. Letters from Afar. Notes. 1. The Pravda editors deleted about 1/5 of the first letter. The cuts concern chiefly Lenin's characterization of the Menshevik and Socialist revolutionary lenders as conciliators and flunkies of the bourgeoisie, their attempts to hide from the people the fact that representatives of the British and French governments helped the cadets and Octoberists secure the abdication of Nicholas II, and also Lenin's exposure of the monarchist and imperialist proclivities of the provisional government, which was determined to continue the predatory war. 2. Lenin here refers to the Petrograd Soviet of Workers' Deputies, which emerged in the very early days of the February Revolution. Elections to the Soviet began spontaneously at individual factories and within a few days spread to all the factories in the capital. On February 27, March 12, before the Soviet had assembled for its first meeting, the Menshevik liquidators K. Gvozdov and B.O. Bogdanov, and Duma members N.S. Chkaids, M.I. Skoblev and others proclaimed themselves the Provisional Executive Committee of the Soviet in an attempt to bring it under their complete control. At its first meeting, in the evening of the same day, the Soviet formed a presidium, composed of Chkaids, Kerensky and Skoblev who, together with A.G. Shliapnikov, N.N. Sukhanov and Y.M. Steklov, made up the Executive Committee. Provision was made for inclusion of representatives of the Central and Petrograd Committees of the Socialist parties. The Socialist revolutionaries were at first opposed to the organization of the Soviet, but subsequently delegated their representatives, V. N. Alexandrovich, V. M. Zenzinov and others. The Soviet proclaimed itself the organ of the workers and soldiers, and up to the first Congress or Soviets, June 1917, was factually an all-Russian center. On March 1, 14, the Executive Committee was extended to include soldiers' deputies. Among them F.F. Lind, A.I. Paterin and A.D. Sadovsky. The Bureau of the Executive Committee was composed among others, of N.S. Chkaids, Y.M. Steklov, B.O. Bogdanov, P. Stushatka, P. Krasakov, K. Gvozdov, N.S. Chkaids and A.F. Kerensky were delegated to represent the Soviet on the Duma Committee. On February 28, March 13, the Soviet issued its manifesto to the population of Petrograd and Russia. It called on the people to rally around the Soviet and take over the administration of local affairs. On March 3, 16, the Soviet appointed several commissions, on food, military affairs, public order and the press. The latter commission provided the first editorial board of Izvestia, composed of N.D. Sokolov, Y.M. Steklov, N.N. Sukhanov and K.S. Grudnevich, V.A. Bazarov and B.V. Avalov were added somewhat later. Meetings of the executive committee were attended, in a consultative capacity, by the Social Democratic members of all the 4 State Duma, 5 representatives of the Soldiers' Commission, 2 representatives of the Central Trade Union Bureau, representatives of the District Soviets, the Izvestia Editorial Board, and other organizations. The Soviet appointed special delegates to organize district Soviets and began the formation of a militia, 100 volunteers for every 1,000 workers. Though leadership of the Soviet was in the hands of compromising elements, the pressure of the militant workers and soldiers compelled it to take a number of revolutionary measures, the arrest of Tsarist officials, release of political prisoners, etc. On March 1, 14, the Soviet issued its Order No. 1 to the Petrograd garrison. It played a very big part in revolutionizing the army. Henceforth all military units were to be guided in their political actions solely by the Soviet. All weapons were to be placed at the disposal and under the control of company and battalion soldiers' committees. Orders issued by the Provisional Committee of the State Duma were to be obeyed only if they did not conflict with the orders of the Soviet, etc. But at the crucial moment, on the night following March 1, 14, the compromising leaders of the Soviet executive voluntarily turned over power to the bourgeoisie. They endorsed the provisional government composed of representatives of the bourgeoisie and landlords. This was not known abroad, since papers standing to the left of the cadets were not allowed out of the country. Lenin learned of the surrender of power only when he returned to Russia. 3. Octobrists, members of the Union of October 17, a counter-revolutionary party formed after promulgation of the Tsar's Manifesto of October 17, 30. 1905. It represented and upheld the interests of the big bourgeoisie and of the landlords who ran their estates on capitalist lines. Its leaders were A.I. Guchkov, a big Moscow manufacturer and real estate owner, and M.V. Rodzianko, a rich landlord. The Octobrists gave their full support to the Tsar's home and foreign policy and in the First World War joined the Progressist Bloc, a sham opposition group demanding responsible government. In other words, a government that would enjoy the confidence of the bourgeoisie and landlords. The Octobrists became the ruling party after the February Revolution and did everything they could to ward off socialist revolution. Their leader, Guchkov, was war minister in the first provisional government. Following the Great October Socialist Revolution, the party became one of the main forces in the battle against Soviet power. The Party of Peaceful Renovation was a constitutional monarchist organization of the big bourgeoisie and landlords. It took final shape in 1906 following the dissolution of the First Duma. It united the left Octobrists and right cadets and its chief leaders were P.A. Haydn, N.N. Lvov, P.P. Rybushinsky, M. Istakovich, Y.N. Trubetskoy, D.N. Shipov. Like the Octobrists, it sought to safeguard and promote the interests of the industrial and commercial bourgeoisie and of the landlords who ran their estates along capitalist lines. In the Third Duma the party joined with the so-called Party of Democratic Reforms to form the Progressist Group. 4. Cadets. The name derives from the Constitutional Democratic Party, the chief party of the Russian liberal monarchist bourgeoisie. Founded in October 1905, it was composed chiefly of capitalists, Zemstvo leaders, landlords and bourgeois intellectuals. Prominent in the leadership were P.N. Milyakov, S. Amuramtsev, V. Maklukov, A.I. Shingryov, P.B. Struve and F.I. Radishev. The cadets became the party of the imperialist bourgeoisie and in the First World War actively supported the Tsarist government's predatory policies and in the February Revolution tried to save the monarchy. The dominant force in the provisional government, they followed a counter-revolutionary policy inimical to the people but advantageous to U.S., British and French imperialism. Implacable enemies of Soviet power, The cadets had an active part in all the armed counter-revolutionary actions and foreign intervention campaigns. Most of their leaders emigrated after the defeat of the counter-revolutionary forces and continued their anti-Soviet and counter-revolutionary work abroad. 5. Trudovik, member of the Trudovik group in the State Duma, formed in April 1906 by petty bourgeois Democrats, peasants and intellectuals of the Narodnik persuasion. The group wavered between the cadets and the Revolutionary Social Democrats, and in the First World War most of its members adopted a social chauvinist position. The Trudoviks spoke for the rich peasants, the kulaks, and after the February Revolution actively supported the provisional government. One of their representatives, Zarudny, became Minister of Justice following the July events and directed the police campaign against the Bolsheviks. After the October Revolution the Trudoviks sided with the counter-revolutionary forces. End of Letter 1.